of those mine workers that have been trapped underground. We speak now to Dr. Crispen Chinguno, Senior Lecturer of Industrial and Economic Sociology at Plaatje University. To speak, Doc, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. More so about just how much longer can the people who are stuck underground afford to be underground in terms of perhaps the most important, ventilation, at least to my understanding.
Yes, good afternoon. Yes, I like you. I would imagine, like in a normal situation, in the mine, there's ventilation, of course, but it is not meant for workers to be in such a sort of like environment for such a prolonged sort of. It's quite sort of like it comes in with a number of problems, especially issues to do it. I'm not sure issues around water, food supply, and many other things. Sort of like it comes out with a number of health challenges, especially for the workers who are underground.
What is it that they would need? How does it typically work? For how long can people who are trapped in the belly of the earth or underground afford to stay there for before it becomes desperate?
Like you would know, we have got many of a lot of these disused sort of like mining shafts around Johannesburg. There are some people who live underground, who actually sort of like in a way, it really depends. But this is mainly purely an industrial relations sort of like conflict. So we should see it in that light as mainly, I see it more as an industrial relations sort of like is a strike by workers who are trying to push a demand to their employer in as far as their employment conditions concerned. I think it centers around organizational rights and issues around recognition of union. And then it also talks to the question around, I think there's a background to it actually, which I have not been seeing in the mainstream media. When you look at, I think we need to look at the material conditions of these workers who are working for this particular mine. And I think the NUM is sort of like the recognized trade unions at this particular mine. And then earlier this month, they just entered into an agreement, instead of a 3-year agreement. And I was actually surprised when I looked at, especially the agreement. Of course, it has to sort of like send us around the context. You can't sort of like compare it with what is happening in other contexts. But the reality of the matter is that workers, they tend to compare relatively with other workers in similar conditions. For example, you would find that according to this agreement, the 3-year agreement, the workers at this particular mine, some of them could still be earning below 10,000 a month in terms of the minimum wage. But when you compare in terms of what other mine workers are getting, that's way sort of like in a way far in comparative terms. You'll find that they will only be able to get to 13,000 rands per month in 2026. And I think with the current sort of like material condition in terms of the cost of living, so those are some of the factors that sort of like may have compounded this dispute between this industrial relations conflict. And we need to see it in that light. And there's sort of like the workers are trying to sort of like in a way, trying to sort of to improve their material condition. But at the same time, we also see the union, what do you call it? The competition between the union in terms of our legislation, where we see that our industrial relations system promotes sort of like industrial relations pluralism, but at the same time it sort of like gives the first prize to the majority sort of like union. The union that becomes the majority, it almost like gets the first prize, and it almost making it very difficult for other minority unions. So that tend to sort of like in a way, it sort of like brings in the problem of sort of this sort of rivalry or sort of like competitions between sort of like unions. This competition, which is in a way can be sometimes regressive. at the end of the day. So we sort of like, in a way, we also, it's also tied to it could also be sort of this strike is a strategy in a way in terms of the union trying to gain sort of like, in a way, recognition at the same time. So how do you do it? Which is quite very common in terms of when you look at the history of strikes and the history of industrial relations in South Africa and globally, where the workers would use this strategy to disrupt the normal production and then get the sort of like attention of the senior management. And at the same time, it's sort of like, in a way, it also sends us around. These are workers who we are in a situation where there's very high levels of unemployment. So the question is around that may be raised, why this particular strategy instead of a conventional sort of like strike where the workers won't come. This also talks to where we need to look at their position. We are sitting in a situation where the mining industry is in a serious sort of like decline.
Okay.
And a very high unemployment sort of like, yes.
Sure. Thank you very much, Doc, for your time this afternoon. Dr. Crispen Chinguno, Senior Lecturer of Industrial and Economic Sociology at Plaatje University.